Simple carbohydrates and simple sugars cause 2 to 4 hours of increased inflammation coupled with immune suppression. Overconsumption of wheat and potatoes causes dietary displacement of fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and berries because people can only eat so much in a given day. If they're over relying on wheat and potatoes, then by definition, they're under consuming, relatively speaking, other fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and berries. This results in a lack of fiber intake and a lack of phytochemical diversity. This promotes constipation, deficiency of antioxidants, and a deficiency of anti-inflammatory phytochemicals. As I mentioned previously, many patients do not consume enough dietary protein. This impairs healing and it also impairs detoxification processes because, as we all know, phase 2 of detoxification is the conjugation step, and many of those conjugating agents are derived from amino acids. So if dietary protein intake is inadequate, phase 2 detoxification conjugation will also be impaired. A pro-inflammatory diet is also characterized by an excess of omega-6 fatty acids. This promotes inflammation and tumor growth. And we also see now, in an article that I'll review with you in just a moment, that saturated fatty acid consumption also promotes directly dysbiosis, and the increased consumption of omega-3 fatty acids, which of course have an anti-inflammatory effect, actually promotes greater microbial diversity and eubiosis within the gut. So fatty acids, we've all learned that those work through the production of leukotrienes and prostaglandins, but what we now know, based on recent animal studies, is that the consumption of either saturated fatty acids, which promotes dysbiosis, contrasts with the effect of anti-inflammatory omega-3 fatty acids, which can promote enhanced eubiosis. The diet that promotes inflammation also promotes dysbiosis, reduced microbial diversity with an increase in small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. To drive that point home one more time, I would like to show you a metaphor that I've come up with. It's kind of a musical metaphor of immunomicrobial interactions. So let's just take a look at this. Maybe this will work for some of you. Again, we define eubiosis as no pathogens, great microbial diversity, and a relatively low or moderate volume of those microbes. So visually, you might say that it's kind of like white noise to the immune system without a single alarm or without a single predominant signal. So let's say that eubiosis kind of looks like this to your immune system. And we might say that this is a relatively low volume of static or white noise, but without any punctuating marks that would indicate some type of an alarm or an alarm response. So sticking with this musical metaphor, let's describe small intestine bacterial overgrowth as too much volume. So if the white line in the middle is baseline, let's say that SIBO is simply too much volume and too much static and too much noise and too many potential alarms for the immune system to respond to. As you would expect, this type of profile would trigger a generalized, nonspecific pro-inflammatory response, and that's exactly what we see in patients who have bacterial overgrowth, is they have a nonspecific pro-inflammatory response due to the increased microbial translocation and also the increased absorption of those microbial fragments from gram-negative and gram-positive bacteria. Now let's look at what we might call inflammatory dysbiosis, which can include pathogens and obviously includes less diversity. Inflammatory dysbiosis provides less diversity with a few major alarm signals. So let's say that it looks like this if we're going to use our musical metaphor. So we see that some of the signals are actually missing, so that's a reduction in total diversity. And then of course, with that reduction in total diversity, we have more opportunity for opportunistic infections and more acute alarm signals, which you can see are indicated either by yellow, orange, or red in this musical or sound representation. So I'd like for you to take a moment to look at this and use this mentally as a way potentially to understand the differences between eubiosis, SIBO, and inflammatory dysbiosis. And if this metaphor works for you, then this is another tool that you can use with your clients to help them understand. What we're aiming for is a low level of white noise that stimulates the immune system but doesn't stimulate it to the extent that it produces a pro-inflammatory effect. When the gut has too many microbes in it, we call that small intestine bacterial overgrowth, too much volume, too much inflammation, too much inflammatory response. More severe than that is inflammatory dysbiosis. Less diversity allows for more pathogen growth. And with that, we're going to see certain alarm signals get triggered, certain pro-inflammatory pathways get triggered, and that's what's going to lead to clinical inflammatory disease. So, consistent with what I've said previously about a health promoting diet versus a pro inflammatory or disease promoting diet, we see that these diets mediate their effects at least partly and very importantly through the gastrointestinal microbiome. So, let's take a look at this information. In this case, I'm going to look at an article from CNN. And my summary of this, the summary that I'd like for you to key in on, is that processed food diets promote obesogenic dysbiosis and kill or starve off about 30% of gut bacteria. So let me read that one sentence again. Processed food diets promote obesogenic dysbiosis. That is reduced diversity, greater total microbial count, and that is inherently pro-inflammatory, and that inflammation promotes insulin resistance and the development of obesity. Processed food diets promote obesogenic gastrointestinal dysbiosis, and more specifically and mechanistically, these diets, due to their lack of phytonutrient and lack of fiber diversity, kill or starve off about 30% of gut bacteria. So again, that's the opposite of what we want. We want more diversity. Consuming processed foods gives us less diversity because of the lesser quantities of phytochemicals and different types of fiber and carbohydrate. Again, the typical processed food diet over relies on wheat, as you can see in this picture, and also potatoes, as you can see in this picture. And that's the diet that correlates with obesity, insulin resistance, inflammatory diseases generally, and inflammatory bowel disease in particular. Now, you can see this was published in CNN 2015, and this is just a popular story about a particular individual who had access to microbial analysis and kind of tested his own microbiome and the changes that would occur after consuming a processed food diet only for 10 days. And you can see the part that I highlighted says, a strict diet of fast food for 10 days as part of his dissertation project, it stripped his gut microbiome of about 1/3 of its 3,500 bacterial species, and the bacteria that have been linked with obesity flourished. So later in this program, we'll talk again about specific bacteria, and we'll talk about the bacterial profiles and the individual bacteria that either promote